The Ômega was bleeding in the snow. The Alpha King carried her home. The snow had not stopped falling for 3 days. It came down in curtains of white so thick that the sentinels posted along the northern watchtowers of Dunhaven could barely see the tree line beyond the outer wall. The kingdom lay buried beneath winter's cruelest hand, and the wolves, both beast and man, had retreated to the warmth of stone and fire. But not all of them, not the king. Cale Thornvane rode through the storm with 6 of his most trusted riders, their horses laboring through drifts that reached the animals' chests. He had received word 3 hours before dawn that a border village had been raided in the night. Its granary emptied and 2 of its elders found dead in their beds with their throats opened. The raiders had left no banner, no mark, no trail that the village scouts could follow in the blinding white. But Kyle was no village scout. He was an alpha of the old blood, and the scent of violence clung to the wind like iron and ash. He was a tall man, broad across the shoulders, with dark hair that fell past his jaw and eyes the color of winter sage, pale green flecked with gold that burned brighter when the wolf inside him stirred. His face was hard and angular, beautiful in the way that a blade is beautiful, and there was a quietness to him that most men mistook for patience. It was not patience, it was control. The beast beneath his skin was vast and ancient, a wolf the color of black smoke whose paws left prints the size of dinner plates, and Cale had spent his entire life learning to hold that creature on a leash made of will alone. They found the trail 2 leagues north of the village where the raiders had crossed a frozen creek and left behind a broken saddlebag. One of his riders, Brennan, a beta with a nose nearly as sharp as the king's, dismounted and held the leather to his face. 3 horses, Brennan said, maybe 4, moving fast toward the Grey March. The Grey March was contested land, a stretch of barren forest and frozen bog that lay between Cale's kingdom of Dunhaven and the fractured territories of the south, where lesser alphas fought over scraps of power like dogs over a bone. It was lawless country, a place where desperate men went to disappear. Kyle said nothing. He turned his horse north and pressed on. They rode for another hour through the punishing cold. The wind cut through their furs and found the skin beneath, and even Cale, whose blood ran hotter than any mortal man's, felt the teeth of it against his throat. The sky was the color of lead, and the snow erased the world behind them as quickly as they moved through it. There was no sound but the crunch of hooves and the low, mournful keening of the wind through the bare branches of the birch trees that lined the ridge. It was Brennan who saw her first. He pulled his horse up short and pointed toward a shallow depression at the base of a great oak, whose trunk was wider than 3 men standing abreast. "My king," he said, and his voice was strange, not alarmed, something quieter than that, something almost reverent. Kyle followed his gaze and felt the wolf inside him lunge against its chains. There was a woman lying in the snow. She was curled on her side with her knees drawn up and her arms wrapped around herself, and the snow had already begun to bury her. Her hair was long and dark, almost black against the white, and it fanned out around her head like a spill of ink. She wore a thin dress of gray wool that was torn at the shoulder and soaked through with something darker than water. Blood, a great deal of it. It had spread beneath her in a halo of deep crimson that the snow was slowly swallowing, and her skin, what he could see of it, was the color of alabaster. She was not moving. Kyle dismounted before he realized he had done so. His boots sank into the drift, and he crossed the distance to her in 4 long strides, dropping to his knees beside her body. He pulled off his glove and pressed 2 fingers to the side of her throat. Her skin was so cold it burned his fingertips, but beneath that cold, faint and thread-like, he felt the flutter of a pulse, and then the scent hit him. It came through the blood and the snow and the sharp bite of the winter air like a torch thrown into a dark room, sweet and deep and devastating, like honey warmed over coals, like the first rain after a drought, like something he had been searching for his entire life without knowing he had been looking. Every nerve in his body went taut. The wolf inside him did not lunge this time. It went perfectly, terrifyingly still. Ômega. She was an Ômega. Kyle had encountered Ômegas before. They were rare, 1 in perhaps 10,000 births, and they were prized beyond measure in the kingdoms of the wolves. An Ômega's scent could calm a raging alpha, could heal wounds that no medicine could touch, could bind a pack together with bonds stronger than blood or oath. They were treasured, protected, fought over, killed for. And this one was bleeding to death in the snow in the middle of nowhere, dressed in rags. with no mark of any house or pack upon her. "She's alive," Kyle said. His voice sounded strange to his own ears. Rough, almost raw. He shrugged off his cloak, heavy black wolf fur lined with wool, and wrapped it around her body, lifting her from the snow as if she weighed nothing at all. She was light, too light. He could feel the bones of her shoulders and the ridge of her spine through the thin fabric of her dress, and a fury unlike anything he had known rose up in him like a tide. Someone had done this to her. Someone had hurt her and left her here to die. And when he found out who, he would pull them apart with his bare hands. Her head fell against his chest and a small sound escaped her lips. Not a word, not quite a moan, but something between the two. Her eyelids fluttered, and for the briefest moment, he saw her eyes. They were dark brown, almost black, and in them, he saw pain and fear and a terrible, exhausted resignation, as though she had already accepted that she was going to die, and this warmth against her face was only the last cruel trick of a fading body. "You're not dying," Kale told her, and the Alpha command in his voice was so absolute that even his riders straightened in their saddles. "Not here, not today." He carried her to his horse and mounted with her cradled against him, one arm locked around her waist. She weighed almost nothing. "Brennan," he said, "ride ahead. Tell Maren to prepare the healer's chamber. Hot water, clean linen, everything she needs. Go now." Brennan was already turning his horse. He did not ask questions. He did not need to. Kale wheeled his mount south and rode for Dunhaven with the Ômega bleeding in his arms, and the wolf inside him howling with a sound that was not hunger, not rage, but something far more dangerous. It was recognition. The ride back took 2 hours, and every minute of it was a war fought in silence. The woman drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes murmuring words he could not understand in a dialect he did not recognize, sometimes going so still and quiet that he had to press his mouth against her hair and listen for the thin whisper of her breathing. The blood from her wounds soaked through his cloak and his shirt and spread warm against his chest, and he could feel the life leaking out of her with every mile. He held her tighter. He rode faster, and the wolf paced inside him, frantic and snarling, because it understood something that the man was only beginning to grasp, that if this woman died, something inside them would die with her, something that had only just begun to wake. They reached the gates of Dunhaven as the last gray light of afternoon was drowning in the storm. The fortress rose out of the snow like a mountain, black stone walls 60 feet high, crowned with iron spikes and the banners of the Thornvane house, a silver wolf on a field of midnight blue. The gates swung open as Kale approached, and he thundered through the courtyard without slowing, scattering servants and soldiers alike. Maren was waiting at the steps of the keep. She was a tall woman in her middle years, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a severe braid, and the steady, unshakable gaze of someone who had seen every kind of wound and every kind of death, and had stopped flinching at either long ago. She was Dunhaven's chief healer, and she was the closest thing Kale had to a mother, though neither of them would ever say so aloud. She took one look at the woman in his arms, and her expression went flat and focused. "Bring her inside. Now." Kyle carried her through the corridors of the keep and into the healer's chamber, where a fire had already been built, high enough to push back the cold, and the long wooden table in the center of the room had been covered with clean white linen. He laid the Ômega down as gently as he could, and when her body left his arms, he felt the absence of her like a wound. Maren was already cutting away the ruined dress, and what she found beneath it made even her go still for a moment. The woman's body was a map of suffering. There were bruises layered over bruises, old yellow ones beneath fresh purple ones, and thin white scars that crisscrossed her back and shoulders like the work of a whip applied with methodical patience over a long period of time. The wound that had bled so heavily was a deep gash across her left side, just below the ribs, made by a blade that had been driven in and twisted. There was a second cut along her right arm, defensive, as though she had tried to block the blow that caused the first. Her feet were bare and torn and bloody from running through the frozen forest, and her fingers were blue with the cold. "How long was she out there?" Maren asked without looking up. "I don't know. Hours at least. She should be dead." Maren placed her hand flat on the woman's chest and closed her eyes, and Kale saw her brow furrow. Her heartbeat is weak, but it's steady. Steadier than it has any right to be. She opened her eyes and looked at him, and there was something in her expression that he could not quite read. "She's an Ômega. I know. You know what that means." It means she heals faster than she should. It means her body is fighting to survive even when it has no reason to. He paused. It means someone threw away the most precious thing in the known world like refuse. Maren studied him for a long moment. Then she turned back to her work. Wait outside. I need to clean and stitch these wounds. And I need you to not be standing over me growling while I do it. He did not want to leave. Every instinct in his body, man and wolf alike, screamed against it. But Maren was the only person alive who could give him an order and expect it to be obeyed, so he turned and walked out of the chamber and closed the door behind him, and stood in the corridor with his back against the stone wall and his hands shaking. Brennan found him there 20 minutes later. The beta approached carefully, the way one approaches a wolf whose hackles are raised, and stopped at a respectful distance. The riders are asking about the border patrol. What should I tell them? Tell them to double the watch on the northern passes. Whatever raided that village came from the Grey March, and they may come again. Cale's voice was level, but his eyes were not. They burned with the faint amber glow that signaled the wolf pressing close to the surface. And send word to Lord Vasek at Ironmere. I want to know if anyone in the Southern Territories has reported a missing Ômega. Anyone at all. Brennan hesitated. You think she belongs to one of the Southern packs? I think someone tried very hard to make sure she didn't belong to anyone anymore. I want to know who. Brennan nodded and left, and Kyle stood alone in the corridor and listened to the muffled sounds of Maren working behind the closed door, and tried to remember the last time his hands had trembled like this. He could not. The Ômega woke 3 days later. Kale knew the moment it happened because the wolf told him. He had been in the Great Hall, meeting with his war council about the border raids, when a sudden jolt of awareness shot through him like lightning through a rod. He stopped mid-sentence, stood up from the table, and walked out of the room without a word of explanation, leaving 6 of his most senior advisors staring after him in bewildered silence. He found her sitting up in the bed in the healer's chamber, propped against a mound of pillows, with Maren beside her holding a cup of broth. Her eyes, those impossibly dark eyes, were open and alert, and they tracked to him the instant he appeared in the doorway. She flinched. It was small and quick, and she tried to hide it, but she saw him, saw his height, his breadth, the Alpha authority that radiated from him like heat from a furnace, and her first instinct was to make herself smaller, to pull the blankets up to her chin, to press back against the pillows as though she could melt into them and disappear. Something in Cale's chest cracked. He stopped in the doorway. He did not enter the room. He made himself still and quiet, and as unthreatening as a man his size could possibly be, which was not very, but he tried. You're safe, he said. You're in Dunhaven. No one is going to hurt you here. She stared at him with those dark eyes, and he could see her measuring him, his words, his posture, the distance between them, reading him the way a prey animal reads a predator, looking for the tell that would reveal the lie, the trap. My name is Kale, he said. I found you in the snow 3 days ago. Do you remember? A pause. Then, very slowly, she shook her head. Can you tell me your name? Another pause. Longer this time. Her fingers tightened on the edge of the blanket. Then, in a voice that was barely more than a whisper, roughened by disuse and cold, and whatever had been done to her throat, she said, Neve, Neve. He held the name in his mouth like something fragile. Neve, you were hurt badly. You've been asleep for 3 days. Maren, he gestured to the healer, has been tending your wounds. Do you remember how you were injured? Her expression closed like a door shutting. She looked down at her hands, thin, pale hands resting on the white wool blanket, and said nothing. Maren caught his eye and gave a small, firm shake of her head. Not now. Kyle inclined his head. Rest, he told her. You can tell me when you're ready. There's no rush. He turned and left, and as he walked down the corridor he heard Maren's voice behind him, soft and soothing, saying, He looks frightening, I know, but he's the safest man in this kingdom. Trust me on that. He did not hear Neve's reply. Over the days that followed, Kale learned about Neve in fragments. Not because she told him. She rarely spoke, and when she did, it was in short, careful sentences that revealed almost nothing, but because he could not help watching her, and watching taught him things that words never could. He learned that she was afraid of loud noises. When a door slammed somewhere in the keep, she would go rigid and her breathing would stop for a full 3 seconds before she forced herself to relax. He learned that she did not like to be touched without warning. Maren discovered this when she reached for Neve's arm to check a bandage, and Neve recoiled so violently she nearly tore her stitches. He learned that she ate like someone who had been starved, quickly, methodically, without pleasure, as though the food might be taken away at any moment. And he learned that despite all of this, despite the fear and the pain and the wariness that surrounded her like armor, there was a core of defiance in her that nothing had managed to break. It showed in the way she held his gaze when he spoke to her, in the way she refused to look away even when the Alpha presence in the room made every Omega instinct in her body tell her to submit. She was beautiful. He had noticed this immediately, of course. The high cheekbones, the full mouth, the dark hair that fell in waves past her shoulders, the graceful line of her neck. But it was a beauty that had been honed by hardship rather than softened by comfort, and there was something fierce beneath it that made it impossible to look away from. On the 5th day, she spoke to him directly for the first time. He had come to the healer's chamber in the evening, as had become his habit, to sit in the chair by the fire and read while Marin changed her bandages. He told himself it was merely a king's duty to check on a guest in his household. The wolf told him he was a liar. Marin had stepped out to fetch more salve, and the room was quiet except for the pop and hiss of the fire. Kale was pretending to read a dispatch from one of his border lords when Neve's voice cut through the silence. "Why did you bring me here?" He looked up. She was sitting in the bed with the blankets pooled around her waist, wearing one of Marin's linen sleeping gowns, and her dark eyes were fixed on him with an intensity that made the wolf go still inside him. "Because you were dying," he said. "That's not a reason. People die in the snow every winter. Kings don't carry them home." He set the dispatch down. "They do when those people are Omegas found bleeding in the Grey March with no pack, no house, and no explanation." Something flickered across her face. Fear, maybe, or something deeper. "Is that what this is? You found an unclaimed Omega and decided to keep her?" The bluntness of it surprised him. The accusation in it did not. "No." Then what? He considered lying. He considered giving her the polished diplomatic answer that a king ought to give, that it was his duty to protect the vulnerable, that Dunhaven offered sanctuary to all who needed it, that her status as Omega had nothing to do with his decision, all of which was true and none of which was honest. "I don't know," he said instead. "I saw you in the snow and I couldn't leave you there. It wasn't a decision. It was the only thing I could do. Like breathing." She stared at him. The fire cracked and sent a shower of sparks up the chimney. Her expression shifted. The suspicion didn't leave, but something else moved in beside it. Confusion, perhaps. The look of someone who has been offered something they don't know how to accept because they've never been offered anything before. "You're the Alpha King of Dunhaven," she said. "Kale Thornvane. Yes, I know who you are. Your name is spoken even in the places I come from. They call you the Black Wolf. They say you once killed 30 men in a single battle without taking a wound." "It was 23, he said, "and I took several wounds." The stories exaggerate. The faintest ghost of something that might have been a smile touched the corner of her mouth, and then it was gone. She looked away, toward the fire, and the light played across her face and made her look younger than he thought she was. "I'll tell you what happened to me," she said quietly, "but not tonight. I need a little more time." "Take all the time you need," she nodded without looking at him, and when Marin returned a few minutes later, she found the two of them sitting in silence, the king in his chair, the Omega in her bed, and the space between them hummed with something that the old healer recognized immediately and chose not to name. It was a week before Neve told him her story, and when she did, it was worse than anything he had imagined. She was from a place called Ashenmoor, a settlement in the southern territories controlled by an Alpha named Draven Lockwood. Draven was not a king. The southern territories had no kings, only warlords who held power through violence and fear. But within the borders of Ashenmoor, his word was absolute law. He was a cruel man and a crueler Alpha, and when Neve had presented as an Omega at the age of 16, Draven had claimed her as his property. She had been his for 6 years. She told the story in a flat, careful voice, looking at the wall behind Kyle's head rather than at his face, and the things she described made his vision blur with a rage so profound it was almost peaceful. Draven had kept her confined. He had beaten her when she disobeyed, and his definition of disobedience encompassed everything from speaking without permission to failing to produce the air he believed she owed him. He had used her Omega abilities, her calming scent, her healing presence, to maintain his hold over his pack, parading her before his men like a weapon to keep them docile and loyal. And when she had finally attempted to escape, 5 months before Kale found her in the snow, he had punished her so severely that she still bore the marks of it on her back. The second escape had been successful, but barely. She had run in the night during a storm, with nothing but the dress on her back and a stolen knife. Draven's men had caught up with her on the edge of the Grey March. There had been a fight, 3 against 1, and the knife had been taken from her and turned against her. She had been stabbed, cut, left for dead. They hadn't bothered to finish the job because the cold would do it for them, but they had underestimated her. They had underestimated the fury of a woman who would rather die in the snow than spend one more day in a cage. When she finished, the room was very quiet. Kale sat in his chair with his hands gripping the armrests so hard the wood creaked beneath his fingers, and the wolf inside him was not pacing. It was not snarling. It was utterly, lethally still, the way it went still before a kill. "I'm going to destroy him," Kale said, and his voice was barely human. Neve's gaze snapped to his face, and for the first time he saw something there that was not fear or suspicion or exhaustion. It was surprise. "What?" "Draven Lockwood. I'm going to ride south, and I'm going to tear down every wall he ever built, and I'm going to make him answer for every mark on your body. You can't start a war over one Ômega. Watch me, Kale." It was the first time she had used his name, and the sound of it in her voice, soft and fierce and almost pleading, stopped him like a hand against his chest. "That's not why I told you. I told you because you asked, and because you've been kind to me, and I owed you the truth. I didn't tell you so you could march an army into the Grey March and get your people killed because of me. My people are already being killed. The border raids, the village that was attacked the night I found you, that was Lockwood's work. I'm sure of it now. He's been testing our defenses, probing for weakness, and he's looking for you." The color drained from her face. "You think he knows I'm here? I think he knows you're somewhere in my territory, and he's going to keep sending men until he finds you or until I stop him." He leaned forward, and the amber was bright in his eyes now. "Neve, I'm not asking your permission to protect my people. I'm telling you that whatever Draven Lockwood wants, he is not going to get. Not from my kingdom, not from this house, and not from you. Not ever again." She looked at him for a long time, and her eyes were bright with something that might have been tears, but that she refused to let fall. "You don't even know me," she whispered. "I know enough." There was a moment, suspended, electric, trembling, when the air between them seemed to hum with a frequency that only they could hear. The wolf and the Ômega, the broken woman and the man who wanted to break the world for her. And then Neve looked away, and the moment passed. But something had changed. Something had settled into place between them, quiet and certain and irreversible, like a key turning in a lock. The weeks that followed were complicated. Not everyone in Dunhaven was pleased about the Ômega's presence. Lord Harmond Voss, the eldest member of Kale's war council and a man who measured all things in terms of political advantage, was the first to raise the concern that sheltering a fugitive Ômega from a southern Alpha could be interpreted as an act of aggression. "You're giving Lockwood a cause," Voss argued during a private meeting in Kale's study. "If he claims she's his bonded mate, she's not his bonded mate. She was his prisoner. That distinction means nothing in the southern territories. Their laws recognize ownership of Ômegas, and by their customs, she belongs to him. If you keep her here, you're stealing another Alpha's claimed Ômega. Half the southern packs will rally behind him. Then they'll rally behind a dead man." Voss pressed his lips into a thin line. He was not a coward, and he was not a fool, but he had spent 40 years navigating the treacherous politics of the Wolf Kingdoms, and he understood things about power that Kale's younger instincts sometimes missed. "My king," he said carefully, "I am not suggesting we turn the girl over. I am suggesting that we consider whether there is a way to resolve this that does not involve plunging the North into a war with the entire Southern Alliance." "Find one," Kale said, "and in the meantime, the Ômega stays." But Voss was not the only source of friction. There was also the matter of Lady Ascendra Crane, the daughter of one of Kale's most powerful vassal lords, who had been positioned for years as the most likely candidate for Kale's queen. Ascendra was a beta of considerable beauty and sharper intelligence, and she had cultivated a network of alliances within the court that gave her influence far beyond her official standing. She had been patient. She had been strategic. And she had watched with barely concealed fury as the king began spending every evening in the healer's chamber with a scarred Ômega from the south. Ascendra did not confront Kale directly. She was too clever for that. Instead, she began a quiet campaign of whispers. Nothing overt, nothing traceable, just a steady drip of suggestion into the ears of those who mattered. The Ômega was not what she seemed. The Ômega had been sent to bewitch the king. The Ômega was a spy for Lockwood, playing the victim to gain access to Dunhaven's defenses. It was poison, and it spread the way poison does, slowly, invisibly, and with devastating effect. Neve, for her part, was aware of none of this. She was focused on healing, not just her body, which was mending with the accelerated speed typical of Ômegas, but the deeper wounds that no salve could reach. She spent her days in Marin's company, learning the names of herbs and the uses of poultices, and discovering to her own surprise that she had a gift for it. Her Ômega instincts, the same instincts that Draven had exploited to control his pack, responded to the work of healing with a joy she had never felt before. For the first time in her life, the thing that made her different was not a cage. It was a calling, and she spent her evenings with Kale. They did not touch. They rarely even sat close together, but they talked, for hours sometimes, about everything and nothing. He told her about his father, who had died when Kale was 19 and left him a kingdom on the brink of civil war. She told him about her mother, an Ômega like herself, who had died giving birth to Neve and left her daughter with nothing but a silver locket and a name. He told her about the wolf, how it felt to transform, the agony and the ecstasy of it, the way the world looked different through those eyes, more vivid and more violent and more alive. She told him about Ashen Moor, the cold rooms, the locked doors, the sound of Draven's boots on the stairs when he came for her in the night. She told him these things without self-pity and without asking for comfort, and he listened without offering either, because he understood that what she needed was not sympathy, but witness, someone to hear the truth and not look away. It was during one of these evenings, near the end of the third week, that the wolf broke free. Not literally, not quite. But the bond between Alpha and Ômega, which had been building since the moment he found her in the snow, reached a tipping point that neither of them could control. They were sitting by the fire, and she was telling him about a song her mother used to sing, a melody she remembered but whose words she had forgotten, and she hummed a few bars of it, soft and low, and the sound went through him like an arrow. He stood up, the chair scraped back. His eyes were full amber, blazing, and the air around him shimmered with the barely contained energy of the shift. Neve's breath caught. She looked up at him and she saw the wolf looking back at her through the man's eyes, and she did not flinch. She did not pull away. She held his gaze, and the Ômega in her responded to the Alpha's call with a warmth that spread through her chest like sunlight through stained glass. "I need to go," Kyle said through his teeth. He did not finish. He turned and left the room, and a minute later, Neve heard the distant sound of a howl rising from the courtyard below, deep and raw and full of longing, and she pressed her hands to her face and felt the tears she had been holding back for weeks finally begin to fall. She was not crying because she was afraid. She was crying because she was not. For the first time since she could remember, she was not afraid, and the absence of fear was so overwhelming, so alien, so unbearably tender, that it broke something open inside her that she had thought could never be opened again. The crisis came on a cold morning in the fourth week, and it came from a direction no one expected. A rider arrived at the gates of Dunhaven bearing the banner of parley, a white flag marked with the ancient symbol of truce that even the most savage warlords of the South still honored. He carried a message from Draven Lockwood. The message was simple. Draven knew that Neve was in Dunhaven. He demanded her return. If she was not delivered to the Grey March crossing within 7 days, he would consider it an act of war, and he would march on Dunhaven with the combined forces of 4 southern packs who had pledged their support. Kyle read the message in the Great Hall, surrounded by his council, and then he set it on fire and let the ashes fall to the floor. "Send the rider back with my answer," he said. "Tell Lockwood that if he sets foot in my territory, I will personally rip the spine from his body." The council erupted. Voss was shouting about alliances and supply lines. Lord Calder Wren, who commanded Dunhaven's cavalry, was already calculating troop movements. Lady Azendra watched from the shadows of the gallery, with eyes that glittered with something that looked very much like satisfaction. In the chaos, no one noticed when Neve, who had been standing in the corridor outside the hall, turned and walked away. Kale found her 2 hours later in the stables, saddling a horse with hands that shook but did not hesitate. "No," he said. She did not turn around. I won't be the reason your people die. My people are already prepared to fight. They've been prepared since the day the border raids started. Lockwood was always going to come. You're not the cause of this war, Neve. You're the excuse he's using. Then take away his excuse. She turned to face him, and her eyes were dry, and her jaw was set, and she looked, in that moment, more like a queen than anyone Kyle had ever met. Let me go. I'll ride south. I'll lose myself in the disputed lands. He'll follow me and leave Dunhaven alone. And then what? He catches you. He takes you back. The words stuck in his throat like thorns. I won't allow it. It's not your decision. The hell it isn't. He closed the distance between them in 2 strides and caught her hands, gently, always gently, even now, and held them. Her fingers were cold. They always were. Neve, listen to me. I know you've spent your whole life being told that your only value is what you can give to someone else. Your scent, your healing, your body. I know you've been treated as a thing to be owned and used and discarded, but that is not what you are. Not to me, not to anyone in this house. And I will not let you ride out of here and sacrifice yourself because you believe your life is worth less than the lives of the people you'd be protecting. It's not about worth, she said, and her voice cracked for the first time. It's about mathematics. 1 life against hundreds. It's about you, and I won't lose you. I can't. He lifted her hands to his chest and pressed them flat against his heart, and beneath her palms, she felt it, the steady, powerful thunder of it, and beneath that, deeper, the pulse of the wolf. Do you feel that? This didn't exist a month ago. This, whatever this is between us, it started the moment I picked you up out of the snow, and it has not stopped growing since. And if you leave, I swear to you, it will destroy me more surely than any army Lockwood could ever raise. She was trembling. Her whole body was trembling, and the tears she had forbidden were burning in her eyes, and the Ômega in her was reaching toward him with every fiber of her being. And the woman who had survived 6 years of horror and walked barefoot through a blizzard to escape, the woman was terrified, not of him, of hope, of the catastrophic vulnerability of allowing herself to want something she might lose. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. Neither do I. He pressed his forehead against hers, and his breath was warm on her face. But I know I'd rather figure it out with you than live the rest of my life wondering what might have been. She closed her eyes. A tear slipped down her cheek, and then she leaned into him, slowly, carefully, like someone stepping onto ice they're not sure will hold. And he wrapped his arms around her and held her against his chest with a tenderness that belied the immense strength in his body. And they stood there in the quiet of the stables while the horses shifted in their stalls, and the snow fell softly outside, and the world teetered on the edge of war. They did not kiss. They did not need to. What passed between them was older and deeper than any kiss, a binding, silent, and absolute, written not in words, but in the very marrow of their bones. The preparations for war began the next morning. Kyle was a methodical commander, and he approached the coming conflict with the same cold clarity that had won him every battle he had ever fought. He sent riders to his vassal lords with orders to muster their forces and march for Dunhaven. He dispatched scouts to the Grey March to track Lockwood's movements. He ordered the fortress's stores inventoried, its walls inspected, its forges lit to produce weapons and armor at a pace they had not kept since his father's wars. And he made a decision that stunned his council into silence. He named Neve as his intended mate. The announcement was made in the Great Hall, before the assembled lords and ladies and warriors of the Thornvane court, and the reaction was split cleanly down the middle. Half the court erupted in a roar of approval. The idea of an Alpha king bonded to a true Ômega was the stuff of legend, a union that would make Dunhaven the most powerful house in the north by orders of magnitude. The other half, led by the stony silence of Lord Voss and the brittle smile of Lady Ascendra, received the news with a stillness that spoke louder than any shout. Neve stood beside him during the announcement, dressed in a gown of dark blue wool that Marin had helped her choose, and she looked out at the hall full of strangers who would soon be her people, and felt a terror that dwarfed anything Draven Lockwood had ever made her feel. This was not the terror of pain. This was the terror of belonging, of being seen, of standing in the light after a lifetime in the dark and not knowing if the warmth on her skin was the sun or the prelude to a burn. But Kale's hand was at the small of her back, steady and warm, and when she looked up at him, she saw the wolf looking back at her with an expression that was not possession and not hunger, but something simpler and more devastating. Devotion, absolute and unadorned. And she thought, if this is a dream, let me never wake. 3 nights later, Lady Ascendra made her move. It began with a cup of wine. Neve had taken to eating her evening meals in the small dining chamber adjacent to the kitchens, where the atmosphere was warm and informal, and the cook, a boisterous woman named Agatha, had taken a fierce liking to her. It was Agatha who set the cup before her, a goblet of mulled wine, deep red and fragrant with cinnamon and clove. From the ladies' table, Agatha said with an approving nod. Lady Crane sent it over with her compliments, said she wanted to welcome you properly. Neve hesitated. She had not spoken to Isendra since the announcement, and the few times she had seen the woman across the great hall, Isendra's gaze had been unreadable. But the wine smelled lovely, and the gesture seemed kind, and Neve had spent so long being suspicious of every hand extended toward her that she was tired of it. She wanted just once to believe that a gift was simply a gift. She drank. The poison was not the killing kind. Isendra was too clever for that. A dead Ômega in Kael's own keep would have been investigated, and the trail would have led back to her within hours. Instead, she had chosen something subtler. The compound, distilled from the root of a plant called wolfshade that grew in the marshes south of Ironmere, was specifically designed to attack the Ômega bond. It would not harm Neve's body. It would shatter her scent. An Ômega without her scent was an Ômega without her power, without the calming influence that made Alphas loyal, without the healing warmth that made her valuable, without the invisible thread that had been weaving itself between her and Kael since the night in the snow. An Ômega without her scent was, in the eyes of the wolf kingdoms, nothing, no one. A common woman with no bond and no purpose, and no claim to the heart of a king. The effects began within the hour. Neve was crossing the courtyard when the world tilted sideways. The snow-covered stones beneath her feet seemed to ripple like water, and a wave of nausea crashed through her so violently that she dropped to her knees. The cold hit her in a way it hadn't since those first terrible hours in the Grey March, not just on her skin but inside her, spreading through her veins like ice water, freezing out the warmth that the Ômega bond had been building. She gasped. Something was wrong. Something was terribly, fundamentally wrong. She could feel it, a tearing, a severing, as though invisible threads that connected her to everything and everyone around her were being cut one by one. The scent, her scent, the deepest and most essential part of her Ômega nature, was dissolving, evaporating, bleeding out of her like heat from an open wound. No, 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 no. She pressed her hands flat against the cold stone and tried to breathe, and the world kept tilting, and the ice kept spreading, and somewhere far away she could hear shouting, and the last thing she saw before the darkness took her was the sky, gray and heavy and infinite, spinning above her like a millstone. Kael felt it the moment it happened. He was in his war room, studying maps with Lord Wren, when the bond, that warm, steady pulse of connection that had become as natural to him as his own heartbeat, went cold. Not gradually, not gently. It simply stopped, like a candle flame snuffed between two fingers, and the absence of it was so shocking, so violent, that he staggered sideways and had to catch himself on the edge of the table. "My king," Wren said, alarmed. Kael was already running. He found her in the courtyard, unconscious on the stones, with 2 servants kneeling beside her and Marin pushing through the gathering crowd with her healing bag in her hands. He dropped to his knees beside her and gathered her up and held her, and the scent, her scent, the scent that had haunted him since the first moment he breathed it in, that honey and rain warmth that was the distilled essence of everything she was gone, just gone, as though it had never existed. "What happened?" His voice was a snarl. "What happened to her?" "I don't know yet. Bring her inside. Now." He carried her. Again. The way he had carried her that first day, out of the snow. Except this time he was not riding through a blizzard, but walking through the halls of his own home. And the fear he felt was not the fear of losing a stranger, but the terror of losing the only person who had ever made the wolf inside him lie down and be still. Marin worked through the night. She tested Neve's blood, her breath, the texture of her skin. She burned herbs and read the smoke. She consulted texts that were older than the fortress itself, written in a language that only healers of her lineage could still read. And as dawn broke gray and cold over Dunhaven, she came to Kael where he sat outside the chamber door. where he had been sitting for 8 hours without moving, and told him what she had found. "Wolfshade," she said, and her voice was tight with a controlled fury that Kale had never heard from her before. "Someone gave her wolfshade. It's a compound that targets the Ômega gland, destroys the ability to produce scent. In sufficient doses, the damage is permanent." The silence that followed was the loudest thing Kale had ever heard. "Permanent," he repeated. "In most cases, yes." The historical texts describe a handful of instances where the bond was strong enough to override the poison, where the connection between an Alpha and Ômega was so deeply rooted that the body found a way to heal itself. But those are legends, Kyle. Stories told by healers to comfort the grieving. I have never seen it happen. "Who?" Kyle said, and the word was barely a word. It was a sound that came from the wolf, low and guttural and vibrating with a violence that made the stones beneath his feet seem to tremble. Maren looked at him steadily. "I questioned the kitchen staff. The wine was sent from Lady Crane's table. The arrest of Lady Essendra Crane was executed within the hour. She was taken from her chambers by 4 of Kale's royal guards and brought to the Great Hall in chains, and she stood before the assembled court with her chin raised and her eyes blazing with a defiance that might have been admirable if it had not been in service of something so monstrous. Kyle did not sit on the throne. He stood before her, and the wolf was so close to the surface that his shadow on the stone floor behind him was not entirely human. "You poisoned her," he said. Essendra met his gaze without flinching. She was brave, at least. He would give her that. "I protected this kingdom from a pretender. That woman is not fit to be your queen. She's a broken, scarred refugee from the southern waste with no house, no lineage. No, she's an Ômega. She's my Ômega. And you tried to destroy her. I tried to free you from a delusion. An Ômega's scent is a drug, Kyle. It clouds judgment. It overrides reason. You think you love her, but what you feel is chemistry. Animal instinct. It's not real." The great hall was silent. Every lord, every lady, every soldier and servant who had gathered to witness the confrontation held their breath, and into that silence Kale spoke with a voice that was terrifyingly calm. "You are wrong," he said, "about all of it. What I feel for Neve has nothing to do with her scent. I felt it before I knew what she was. I felt it the moment I saw her in the snow. A woman I didn't know, broken and bleeding and left for dead. And something in me recognized something in her that goes deeper than biology, deeper than instinct. You call it delusion. I call it truth. And now you have tried to take it from both of us." He paused. The amber in his eyes burned like the heart of a forge. "You are stripped of your title. Your lands are forfeit. You will leave Dunhaven before nightfall and never return. If you are found within my borders after midnight, you will be treated as an enemy of the crown and dealt with accordingly. Lord Crane will be informed of your actions and the reasons for your exile." Essendra's composure cracked at last. The color drained from her face and her lips parted, and for a moment she looked as though she might speak, might beg, might argue. But something in Kale's expression, something final and unyielding and implacable, stopped her. She closed her mouth. She turned, and she walked out of the great hall with her chains rattling and her head still high, and she did not look back. Later that day, alone in the chamber where Neve lay unconscious and pale and scentless, Kale sat beside the bed and took her hand. It was cold. Everything about her was cold now, as though the poison had not just destroyed her scent, but drained the warmth from her very marrow. He leaned close and pressed his lips to her forehead. "Come back to me," he whispered. "I don't care about the scent. I don't care about the bond. Come back to me as you are, and it will be enough. You will always be enough." She did not stir. 3 days passed, then 4, then 5. Neve did not wake. She lay in the bed like a figure carved from ice, barely breathing, and Maren's face grew more drawn with each passing hour. "Her body is shutting down," the healer told Kyle on the 6th morning. "The wolfshade didn't just attack her scent. It's attacking her Ômega nature itself, the fundamental thing that makes her what she is. Without it, she's losing the will to live. There has to be something. Anything." Maren hesitated. She was not a woman given to sentiment or to offering hope where none existed, but the look on Kale's face, the raw, naked desperation of it, moved her in a way she had not been moved in a very long time. "There is one thing," she said slowly. "In the old texts, the ones I dismissed as legend." She took a breath. "The Alpha's blood." "Explain." "An Alpha of the true bloodline. An Alpha who carries the old power, the power of transformation. His blood carries something that modern healers have never been able to identify: a resonance, a frequency. In the old stories, when an Ômega was poisoned or dying or broken beyond any healer's reach, the blood of her bonded Alpha could reach her where nothing else could. It wouldn't cure the poison, but it might give her body the strength to cure itself. You're asking me to give her my blood. I'm asking you to understand that there is no precedent for this. I have no idea if it will work. I have no idea if it might make things worse. What I know is that she has days, perhaps hours, and this is the only option I have left. Cale rolled up his sleeve. Do it. Marin made a cut along his forearm, a clean, precise incision that welled with blood so dark it was almost black. Alpha blood, the blood of the wolf. She collected it in a small glass vial and mixed it with water and a tincture of herbs whose names she murmured under her breath like a prayer. Then she lifted Neve's head, parted her lips, and poured the mixture into her mouth. Nothing happened. 1 minute, 2, 5. The fire crackled. The snow whispered against the window. Cale's blood dripped from his arm onto the stone floor in small, steady drops that he did not notice and did not care about. And then, a breath, deep and sudden, like a diver breaking the surface of the water after being under too long. Neve's chest expanded, her back arched, and a sound escaped her. Not a gasp, not a cry, but something that resonated on a frequency that made the glass vials on Marin's shelves vibrate, and the fire leap in the grate and the wolf inside Cale howl with a sound that shook the walls of the chamber. The scent returned, not gradually, not gently. It roared back like a river breaking through a dam, filling the room with a warmth and sweetness so overwhelming that Marin staggered backward and Cale dropped to his knees. But it was different now, deeper, richer, laced with something wild and ancient and unmistakably wolven, as though his blood had not merely restored what the poison had destroyed, but had woven itself into the fabric of her Ômega nature and created something entirely new. Neve's eyes opened. They were dark and clear and utterly, profoundly alive, and they found his face immediately, as though he were the only fixed point in a spinning world. "Cale," she said, just his name, just that. He reached for her hand and she reached for his, and their fingers interlaced, and the bond between them, the bond that Isendra had tried to shatter, that the poison had tried to sever, that the cold in the distance and the cruelty of the world had tried to break, blazed to life with a force that neither of them had ever felt before. It was not a thread. It was a chain, unbreakable, forged in blood and suffering and the stubborn, impossible refusal to let go. "You came back," he said, and his voice was wrecked. "You called me back." She lifted their joined hands and pressed them to her cheek, and her skin was warm. Warm at last. "I could hear you. Even in the dark, I could hear you calling." He bowed his head and pressed his face against their clasped hands and breathed her in. The scent, the warmth, the impossible miracle of her. And for the first time since his father's death, Cale Thornvane wept. Marin watched from the doorway, and she said nothing, and she wiped her own eyes with the back of her hand, and she closed the door softly behind her as she left. Neve's recovery was swift after that, almost unnervingly so. Within 2 days she was on her feet. Within 3 she was walking the corridors of the keep, and within a week she was standing in the courtyard watching the soldiers train with a critical eye that surprised everyone who witnessed it. "Your archers are dropping their elbows," she told Cale one afternoon, nodding toward a line of bowmen practicing at the range. "Draven's men shoot from horseback. If your archers can't hit a moving target at 60 yards, they won't survive the first charge." He looked at her. "You know about archery? I know about war. I spent 6 years watching Draven prepare for one. I know his tactics, his formations, the way his commanders think. I know where he positions his cavalry, and which flank he always leaves weak because he's too arrogant to believe anyone would exploit it." She met his gaze. "I'm not just your Ômega, Cale. I'm the woman who survived Draven Lockwood. That means I know how to fight him." From that day forward, Neve sat in on every war council meeting. Lord Voss was appalled. Lord Wren was intrigued. The soldiers, who had already heard the story of the poisoning and the miraculous recovery, regarded her with an awe that bordered on reverence. An Ômega who had been poisoned, who had died and come back, whose scent now carried the wild edge of the Alpha's own blood. She was becoming something more than a woman. She was becoming a symbol, and she was useful, devastatingly so. Her knowledge of Lockwood's forces was detailed and precise, and her strategic mind, sharpened by years of quiet observation in the halls of a man who never suspected that the prisoner in his house was memorizing every word he said, proved to be one of Dunhaven's greatest weapons. "He'll come through the northern pass," she told the council, tracing the route on a map spread across the war table. "He always attacks from the direction his enemy expects. It's a dominance display, not a strategy. He wants you to see him coming. He wants you to feel the weight of his army before a single blow is struck. It's how he controls through fear." "And his weakness?" Kyle asked. "His weakness is that he believes everyone is afraid of him." She looked up from the map, and her dark eyes were fierce. "Show him that you're not, and he won't know what to do." The army of Draven Lockwood arrived at the border of Dunhaven on a morning so cold that the trees cracked and split in the forest. 4,000 men, drawn from the combined packs of the Southern Alliance, their banners black and crimson against the white landscape. Lockwood rode at the head of them, a massive man with a scarred face and the flat, dead eyes of someone who had long ago stopped seeing other people as anything more than obstacles to be destroyed. Cale met him on the field, not with an army at his back, though his army was there, 2,000 strong, drawn up in formation behind the walls of the outer keep, not with threats or ultimatums or the posturing that most alphas engaged in before a battle. He walked out alone, through the gates, across the snow-covered field, and stopped 50 yards from Lockwood's front line. And then he changed. The transformation was not the gradual, controlled thing that most alphas managed. It was an explosion. One moment, Cale was a man standing in the snow, and the next moment the man was gone, and in his place was a wolf. The Black Wolf of Dunhaven, the beast that had haunted the nightmares of every warlord in the north for a decade. It was enormous. Its shoulders stood higher than a man's head. Its fur was the color of smoke and shadow, and its eyes, those pale green eyes, flecked with gold, blazed with an intelligence that was utterly, terrifyingly human. It threw back its head and howled. The sound shattered the morning. It rolled across the field like thunder, and it carried within it something that every wolf in Lockwood's army felt in the deepest part of their animal brain: the absolute, undeniable authority of a true alpha, an alpha of the old blood, an alpha whose power was not built on cruelty or fear, but on something far more fundamental: strength, will, the unshakable certainty of a creature that knows exactly what it is and what it is capable of. Lockwood's horses began to scream. Half of his front line broke before the howl had finished echoing off the hills. Men and wolves alike turned and ran, driven by an instinct older than thought, older than loyalty, older than the threat of any punishment their warlord could deliver. They ran because the wolf on the field was death incarnate, and every cell in their bodies knew it. Lockwood himself held his ground. His face was white with fury, and something else, something that might have been fear, though he would have killed anyone who suggested it. He drew his sword and spurred his horse forward, and for a moment it seemed as though the battle would be decided by a single combat between the warlord and the wolf. It was not. The gates of Dunhaven opened, and through them poured the army of the north, not charging blindly, but advancing in the precise, disciplined formations that Neve had helped design. The cavalry swept wide on both flanks, exploiting exactly the weakness she had identified. The archers, who had spent the past 2 weeks training at her insistence to hit moving targets, unleashed a storm of arrows that fell among the disorganized southern ranks with devastating accuracy. And in the center of the field, the Black Wolf met Draven Lockwood's charge with a speed that the human eye could barely follow. The horse went down. Lockwood was thrown from the saddle, hit the frozen ground, and rolled to his feet with his sword raised, and found himself staring into the jaws of a creature whose teeth were longer than his fingers. The wolf did not kill him. It wanted to. Every fiber of its being, every memory of the scars on Neve's back and the bruises layered over bruises, and the way she flinched at loud noises and ate like someone who expected her food to be taken away, every one of those memories screamed for blood. But Cale was not only the wolf, he was the man. And the man knew that killing Lockwood on the field would make a martyr. It would give the southern packs a rallying cry. It would perpetuate the cycle of violence and retribution that had plagued the wolf kingdoms for generations. So instead, the wolf pinned Lockwood to the ground with one enormous paw on his chest and held him there, helpless and humiliated, while the battle raged and ended around them. It was over in less than an hour. The Southern Alliance, leaderless and demoralized, surrendered in waves. By midday, Lockwood's army had been defeated, scattered and taken prisoner without a single life lost on either side. That last detail was Neve's doing. She had argued for it fiercely in the War Council, against the objections of lords who wanted blood. Kill them and you create enemies, she had said. Spare them and you create allies. Show them that Dunhaven is not what Lockwood told them it was. Show them that a kingdom led by strength doesn't need to rule through fear. It was, Lord Voss would later admit in a rare moment of candor, the most brilliant piece of strategy he had witnessed in 40 years of war. Draven Lockwood was brought before Chaol in chains that evening, in the Great Hall, before the assembled court and the captured commanders of his southern packs. The warlord's face was a mask of impotent fury, and his eyes, those flat, dead eyes, burned with a hatred so pure it was almost admirable. Chaol, dressed in black, with Neve standing beside him, looked down at the man who had caged and beaten and brutalized the woman he loved, and he felt the wolf straining against its leash with a hunger that made his teeth ache, but he held it, because Neve was watching, and because the woman who had survived Draven Lockwood deserved to see him defeated by justice, not by savagery. Draven Lockwood, Chaol said, and his voice carried to every corner of the silent hall. You are charged with the unlawful imprisonment and abuse of an Ômega, with the violation of the ancient protections afforded to all Ômegas by the law of the Pax, with the raiding of sovereign territory, and with the waging of aggressive war against the crown of Dunhaven. How do you answer? Lockwood's gaze moved from Chaol to Neve, and the look he gave her was the look of a man staring at something he considered his property, and could not understand why it had been taken from him. She belongs to me, he said. She has always belonged to me. Neve stepped forward. Every eye in the hall was on her. She was dressed in the dark blue of Dunhaven, and the silver locket her mother had left her hung at her throat, and she was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with her face and everything to do with the way she stood, straight, unafraid, incandescent with a quiet power that filled the room. I never belonged to you, she said, and her voice did not tremble. I survived you. There is a difference that you will never understand. She turned to Chaol. Let the Southern Pax decide his fate. He ruled them through fear. Let them judge him by the same standard. It was, in its own way, more devastating than an execution. The Southern commanders, men who had served Lockwood out of terror, not loyalty, were given the authority to pass judgment on their own warlord. The deliberation took less than an hour. Lockwood was stripped of all rank, all territory, all claim to power, and sentenced to exile in the wastelands beyond the Grey March, where the cold and the wolves and the emptiness would be his only companions for whatever remained of his life. He was led from the hall without another word, and as the doors closed behind him, the great hall of Dunhaven erupted in a sound that Neve had never heard directed at her before. Cheering. They were cheering for her. She stood in the center of it, overwhelmed, and Chaol reached for her hand and held it, and the bond between them sang with a resonance that every wolf in the room could feel, a warmth that spread through the hall like sunlight through clouds, calming and healing and binding them all together in a way that had not happened in Dunhaven since the age of the old kings. The Ômega's gift, freely given, freely received, not as a weapon, not as a chain, but as what it had always been meant to be, a bridge between hearts that might otherwise never have found each other. They were married in the spring. The ceremony was held in the courtyard of Dunhaven, beneath a sky so blue it looked as though the winter had never happened. The snow had melted, and the first green shoots of new growth were pushing through the dark earth, and the air smelled of rain and soil and the distant promise of warmth. Neve wore a gown of white silk embroidered with silver wolves, and her dark hair was woven with wildflowers that Marin had gathered from the meadows beyond the outer wall. She walked through the assembled crowd with a grace that silenced every whisper and stilled every heart, and when she reached the altar where Chaol stood waiting, in his dress black, his dark hair pulled back from his face, his pale green eyes burning with an emotion he did not try to hide, she took his hands and felt the tremor in them and smiled. You're shaking, she murmured. I've been shaking since the day I found you, he murmured back. I just got better at hiding it. The vows they exchanged were the old vows, the ones written in the language of the first wolves, which had not been spoken in Dunhaven for 100 years. They promised not to own, but to honor, not to cage, but to shelter, not to possess, but to cherish. And when the words were finished, Chaol leaned down and kissed her for the first time, gentle and certain and tasting faintly of salt, because both of them were crying and neither of them cared, and the crowd erupted, and the wolves howled, and somewhere in the distance, carried on the spring wind, Neve could have sworn she heard the echo of a song her mother used to sing. That night, as the feast raged in the great hall below, Cale and Neve stood on the balcony of the king's tower and looked out over the kingdom that was now theirs to build together. The stars were thick and bright above them, and the air was cool but not cold, and the sound of music and laughter drifted up from the hall like a benediction. "I used to dream about the snow," Neve said quietly. She was leaning against him, her back against his chest, his arms around her. "Not about Ashenmoor, not about Draven, about the snow, the moment I fell, the moment I stopped being able to feel my body. I thought that was how it ended, cold and alone and forgotten." Cale pressed his face against her hair. "And now I dream about the moment you picked me up." She turned in his arms and looked up at him, and her dark eyes reflected the starlight. "You carried me through the snow, and you didn't even know my name. And you held me against your chest and told me I wasn't going to die. And I believed you. I don't know why. I had no reason to believe anyone. But I heard your voice, and the wolf heard your wolf, and something inside me, something that had been frozen for so long I thought it was dead, woke up, started beating again, started wanting to live." She reached up and traced the line of his jaw with her fingertips. "You didn't just carry me home, Cale. You gave me one. For the first time in my life, I have a home." And he caught her hand and pressed his lips to her palm. "You are my home," he said. "You have been since the moment I found you." And below them, in the great hall of Dunhaven, the wolves sang, Alpha and Beta and Omega alike, their voices raised in a harmony that had not been heard in the north for a generation, a song of unity, a song of survival, a song that would be remembered for centuries, long after the wars were forgotten and the borders had shifted and the names of warlords had crumbled to dust, the song of the Ômega who bled in the snow, and the Alpha King who carried her home,